party's most important demographic. However, there had been signs that Rishi Sunak's party is about to lose this demographic. A poll from February this year showed that only just a quarter of over 65s were going to be lending their vote to the Tories at the next election. So it's no wonder the Conservatives today announced the quadruple, triple lock, double plus good squared. As it originally stood, the triple lock guaranteed that the state pension would increase in line with inflation, average wage growth, or 2.5%, whichever is highest. At a time of low inflation and low wage growth, significant costs to the Treasury were not incurred. However, since the advent of post-pandemic inflation one year and significant wage catch-up next, costs have skyrocketed. Last year, the state pension increased by a record 10.1%, along with pensions winter package worth £5 billion. This year's increase to the state pension again was high, 8.5%. Now, in advance of the general election on the 4th of July, the so-called Triple Lock Plus will increase the personal tax-free pension allowance in line with the same measures of the Triple Lock itself, meaning a higher state pension alone will never be taxed. But this poses two fundamental questions. One, will this be enough to bring over pensioners who are drifting away from the Conservatives? And two, for the rest of us, are these levels of funding for pensions sustainable? Will a state pension growing at this rate still be sustainable by the time I reach retirement? Especially with an ageing population and a declining birth rate to pay for it all. Well, state pensions are now costing the Treasury £112 billion a year. That's twice the defence budget, and a number expected only to go up. Well, here's what Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves had to say about it all earlier.
Today is just another desperate gimmick from the Conservatives. Even before today, they had racked up £64 billion of unfunded tax cuts, and last night they offered us another one. The only reason that pensioners are looking for the first time at paying income tax on their basic state pension is because the Conservatives lost control of the economy, saw inflation soaring, and they have chosen to freeze the personal allowance, not just in this Parliament, but going into the next Parliament as well. Now, I've been really clear, I want taxes to be lower, but I'm not going to make any commitment where I can't say where the money is going to come from.
Rachel Reeves speaking earlier. With me now is the former government minister, now a Reform Party head honcho, I suppose, Anne Widdecombe. And this is a curious issue because, of course, many older voters were having a look at reform. Do you think that this is a worry, perhaps, that the Conservatives have found a way to bring them back?
Well, I think it's quite true that pensioners were looking at reform. They, after all, remember the Conservative Party in its heyday, when it really was a massively impressive party, and they look at the chaos now and think, well, you know, there's got to be something better. So I think, yes, they were looking at reform, and I think they probably still are looking at reform. But the idea that this could buy them off, I think is quite dubious. I mean, they all know that because the allowances have been frozen for so long, that is why pensioners have been caught in paying taxes. There is one thing to be said in favour of this, but it's a very, very small thing, which is that pensions are universal, you know, and even if you, you know, you're Bill Gates or something, you know, the pension is still universal. At least with this, because the highest earners don't actually get any allowances at all, at least by focusing on the allowances, there is a slight emphasis towards those who need it. But I think the government, and it will be too scared to, has to do something much more radical than that. It has to look at the whole business of how pensions are universal and upgrades are universal. And, you know, I even get the £10 Christmas bonus because that's universal. And I think
that's a very interesting thing for you to propose. Would that be, in a sense, abolishing or means testing the triple lock?
No, I don't think so. I think what I've always argued in favour of, and I used to be a pensions minister many, many moons ago, what I've always argued in favour of is that we should be targeting help on the poorest. Now, there are some people who have either nothing or precious little above the state pension, and then there are other people who have very comfortable executive occupational pensions. and they're all treated in the same way. And that is why I think it is important that we start looking at the pensioners who really, really need this help. Those who don't.
What the government say, of course, is that that is almost impossible to do in a fair way, and it's much, much easier to just throw money at everyone, even though you're giving money to millionaires as well.
Well, you are giving money to millionaires, and that's why I've always thought it spectacularly inappropriate. But certainly it can be done. What this is doing is addressing the issue that because allowances have been frozen, therefore gradually pensioners have been sucked into the tax system. And they are, of course, the poorest because the others are paying anyway. You know, those of us with occupational pensions paying anyway. So it has that much merit. But again, because it's universal, there's an awful lot of money going to be wasted. And I also haven't heard how they're going to pay for it.
Well, Anne Widdecombe, former pensions minister, as well as many other hats, thank you very much for joining us and talking through that very important issue. Joining me in the studio now is the UK Director of More in Common, Luke Trill, and the Director of Public Policy at investment platform, AJ Bell, Tom Selby. Luke, I'm going to start with you. Clearly, this is an election gambit. Is it popular?
It is popular. The one thing that I should say is that if the Conservatives not only are going to avoid losing this election but getting annihilated, they need to shore up their support amongst pensioners. We know the average age at which someone starts voting Conservative currently is actually well over retirement age. They really are the Conservative base. And interestingly, we know that across the board, people are more likely to say that the triple lock is not generous enough than is too generous.
Even though it went up by 10.5% last year, 8.5% this year?
Absolutely. Despite that, when you put the triple lock to people, they still say it's not generous enough. And interestingly, younger generations are even more likely to say that it's not generous enough. So I suspect this will be a popular policy. I also think it's a correction from the budget. We did some focus groups after the budget with pensioners who were saying to us, there was nothing in that for us. There was a national insurance cut for working
Which,
people,
of course, pensioners
but
don't
nothing
pay.
for us. Pensioners don't pay. Of course, they were getting that 10% rise in the triple lock just a month later, but they didn't see it like that. So I think that might have been a bit of a fumble from the Conservatives they're trying to correct.
Well, there we go. That's the politics of it. Shall we turn to the economics of it now? Because, Tom, this is, of course, a growing cost to the Treasury. Sadly, when people think they're paying into their own pensions, they're actually funding those who are currently withdrawing pensions.
Yes,
so how does it all add up?
Yeah. Well, so it's going to be challenging for future governments, and I think one of the big problems with the triple lock, and it was actually summed up a little bit in the debate you had there, is that we don't really talk, and politicians don't really talk about the state pension, about what the state pension's supposed to be worth. All they talk about is their commitment to the triple lock, and so it's become this kind of totem for doing right by older people. And what nobody's ever stated is what the triple lock's aiming to achieve. So what is a fair level for the state pension? Now, the flat rate's worth about £11,500 at the moment. No political party and no politician that I've heard has said, this is the aim, this is where we're trying to get to.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not expecting the UK economy to grow by at least 2.5% every year.
No.
And so at some point, if we continue, if we're very silly about extrapolating this on a long-term graph, the cost of the state pension will eclipse the size of the economy if we run on for long enough.
Well, if you take it long enough, then the state pension will be worth more than average earnings. That's just the way the maths works when you've got a 2.5% underpin. But the challenge is that no politician I've heard or spoken to is willing to have a really serious debate about the future of the state pension. So what it should be worth and when people should receive it. And one of the dangers is that if you keep increasing the state pension today, then you may have to increase the state pension age tomorrow.
Right.
And that causes a big intergenerational
It's a trade-off. The higher it goes, perhaps the later in life you can take it, simply because of the maths. But Luke, talking about pensions, it scares people because to people this is their security. People think they pay in all their lives and deserve something in retirement.
Well, absolutely that is exactly what you will hear back in focus groups when you talk about our pensions too generous. You have people say, I've paid into this, you know, I've done my bit for the country, it's now my turn to be looked after by the country. And it would take a very brave political party to challenge the triple lock. Labour aren't doing that.
And yet there is now this difference between the Conservatives and the Labour Party. Conservatives saying no tax on the state pension, the Labour Party saying, well, yes, the state pension would be dragged into tax.
Yeah, that is making a bit of a dividing line, but I think that's because the Conservatives have a bigger job to do to win back pensioners. Like, we know that group who were Conservative in 2019 but are now undecided, their average age is 61. So they're coming up to their pension age. They're actually largely women, so tend to rely on the state pension a little bit more than men do. And they're going to be trying to win that group back, because if that group don't vote or stay at home, you are heading to 1997-style territory.
And just very finally, Tom, in terms of what the Conservatives are saying, how they're going to fund this, in a sentence, does it add up?
I don't think so. I think, from what I've heard, the funding's going to come from tax avoidance. I think I've heard most politicians spend tax avoidance money about 20 times so far in this election.
The Labour Party's promised to spend that as well on various things.
So look, they'll say that they can fund it through those things. Getting money through tax avoidance and clamping down on tax evasion is famously very difficult, so I'd question whether that's doable or not, but it's clearly a very popular policy.
Well, Tom Selby and Luke Trill, thank you very much for talking through those big issues. Now, after the break, we'll be discussing what Nigel Farage had to say at a Reform press conference earlier with Richard Tice, the leader of Reform UK. Also, we're going to be debating how members of Parliament communicate. Should they be using other languages? That next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The most sexiest man in the UK at the moment, as voted for by a dating website, is that man on your screen, Jeremy Clarkson. I'm sorry, Peter, I know he's a man of a certain age, but I'm not getting this one.
Are you not?
No.
This is another reason for an old wrinkly like me to be deeply joyous. Hope springs eternal. He's grey-haired, he's balding, he's got a bit of a pot belly, he's quite tall. You know, I reckon I might be in with half a shower.
As long as it's only hope springing eternal, love. What do you make of this one?
Yeah, I agree with you. A lot of guys watching this will really be a bit befuddled as to how he's the sexiest guy. I think it's a sympathy vote.
No, I get it. I understand it.
But he's got a sense of humour, and he's got plenty of money.
But what's there to understand? How is he the sexiest man?
I'll tell you why. Because he's and I say this as a bloke, he's a man's man. He gets stuck in, he's involved, he's practical, he's physical.
Does that make him
funny,
sexy, though?
He's got money. I think men these days, if you ask me, too effeminate. And women don't want that. Women, well, I don't know what...
What do women want? Go on, just mansplain to me what women want. Go on,
Sorry, tell us,
thank you very much. No, this is voted for by an illicit dating website, OK?
Oh, is it an affairs website?
Married women. But Idris Elba came third.
I just think Jez he's a man's man. He, like I said, he's physical, he gets involved, he likes a beer, he's got plenty of money. How much did he get for the farm on Amazon?
That's so silly. So you're implying women only go for men with money?
Well, no, but I mean...
He did, didn't he? Just said that, yeah. He's got plenty of money for everything sexy.
It's normal for women to want to be with a man who can look after them, no?
No. Will you stop mansplaining what women want?
My mum had an expression, Ben. She said, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. But trust me, if Idris Elba gets himself a pair of wellies, he'll be second next year.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 23 minutes past 8. Now, Reform UK are holding a rally in South Yorkshire this evening, with the leader, Richard Tice, speaking to an audience there, and I'm delighted to be joined by him now. Richard, thank you for making the time for us. Today, you've unveiled a 6-point plan to tackle illegal immigration, to stop the boats. We can see it on our screens now, which include declaring a security threat, leaving the ECHR, and even a turn back the boats policy. Richard, what will declaring a national security threat actually do?
Good evening, Tom, and it's great to be here in the Chill Bar in Barnsley, where actually you'll be delighted to know that the vast majority of people, in a survey of hands I carried out earlier, all put their hands up and say they watch GB News, so that's great news. But also, Tom, on the issue you've just questioned, the national security threat, well, it's actually something that's required, and what Australia did when they turned back the boats, under the UN 51 Convention, you can actually declare a national security threat. And that's very important because the reality is that is the truth, that this is a threat to our national security. And we've got to leave the European Convention on Human Rights because we don't need a foreign overseas court to tell us what to do. But as Nigel talked about this morning, and I've talked about before, the truth is that the French have international obligations under the UN Convention of the Law at Sea 1982 to pick up and take back to France. The Belgians are doing it and the boats have stopped. And the French are failing in their duties. Instead, they're actually aiding and abetting criminality by bringing the boats to the halfway point where they hand them over to Border Force or the RNLI. And that's completely wrong. And this will only stop when you have proper leadership in this country that will do what we know works, and that's pick up and take back. And as Nigel said this morning, if the French Navy won't do it, then we need to use our own military, whether it's the Marines, Border Force.
Richard, does this not enter into the law of unintended consequences? Because the French don't operate in a vacuum. And if the French are mightily annoyed by the British returning migrants to them, however logical it might seem to you or I, the French would potentially declare trade sanctions on the United Kingdom. They could shut the Channel crossing. They could take our fish. The consequences to the UK economy could be severe.
They're in breach of international law, Tom. It is as simple as that, and requires leadership to make it very clear and to have a very hard-nosed discussion with them and to say, you've got to carry out your obligations. If not, we're going to do it for you.
But Richard, I'm talking about realpolitik here.
Hang on, no,
I'm not sure a hard-nosed discussion
yes, and I'm talking about
will work against French nationalism.
Sorry, absolute nonsense. I'm sorry, Tom. What you've got to do is protect British interests, and you've got to stop the boats from crossing the 12-mile line. The whole point of a government is to protect our borders, defend our citizens. And as Nigel said, almost 4,000 boats have crossed, 125,000 people, and it's got to stop. And realpolitik is that actually if you do this, you're doing the French a favour. Joint processing centres in northern France, assess people, make a decision within a fortnight, give them a week to appeal,
on that point, Richard,
and then deport
you've
them
mentioned the
and
1951 Convention and, of course, offshore processing. Under the terms of the 51 Convention, it's a very generous convention. I'm surprised that you don't actually suggest leaving it, because one of the reasons the government has resisted offshore processing is that basically anyone coming from Afghanistan or Iran or many people coming from China even, many countries, many tens of millions of people, perhaps even hundreds of millions of people around the world, have a theoretical right under the 51 Convention to come to the United Kingdom. Offshore processing would simply be a route for them to come here.
Absolutely nonsense, Tom. No, they're all breaking the law because they've come through a safe country. It is as simple as that, but the lefty lawyers won't have it, and the ECHR won't have it, which is why we've got to leave the ECHR. And an important part of declaring a national security threat is that actually that gives you additional abilities to do what's required to protect British citizens and to defend our borders. And that's the right thing. It's also, by the way, Tom, if we show leadership and a shining example here, then firstly, most importantly, we'll save lives, the 15 or so who've sadly died already this year. But it's what the EU leaders should do in the Mediterranean. Pick up and take back to North Africa, and then actually thousands of people in the Mediterranean will stop losing their lives. And I think there's a certain irony that we've actually got the kind and compassionate policy that will save lives. And it's the supposedly nice, fluffy, lefty lawyers and do-gooders, right? They're actually meaning that more people are dying, which means it's them that's got blood on their hands.
I think a lot of people will buy this unintended consequences argument you're making of the lefty lawyers, but I wonder if there is an unintended consequence argument economically for treating the French as the Australians were so ably to treat much smaller countries. Richard, I'm really sorry, we've run to the end of this segment. We'll have to have you back very soon, and I hope that we continue this conversation very soon indeed. Richard Tice there. Now, of course, I'm joined by my panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the PR consultant and former Labour aide, Stella Santakidu. Stella, what did you make of what Reform had to say there about stopping the boats?
So I'm surprised that Richard Tice keeps on talking about international law and how these illegal migrants are breaking the law, when in fact the plan that he's suggesting would be breaking international law. So which one is it? Does the Reform Party care about international law and they want us to abide by it, or they don't care and they think that it is okay if, in the eyes of the international community, we're seeing to do something illegal? Because that's what would be happening if we were turning around the boats. And I'm also very interested in what you said, Tom, about the economic implications, because in this general election, the most important thing is the economy and the cost of living crisis. So how exactly is this policy going to help? I don't think it is. I think it's going to do the opposite.
It might create a sort of blockade with France. Kelvin, do you buy that?
Well, let's face the reality. We can't carry on like this, OK? What Richard says has a shy charm, because something would happen. And I accept the way your questioning was going. Well, would France basically view this as an act of war? Well, since there are 2 points to make there. One, he has already said it's a national security. We will be passing a law. And secondly, were we to end up in some kind of economic blockade with France, would that be a price which the people of our country would be prepared to pay if it meant that we didn't have to take in, honestly, tens of thousands of people into an economy right now which can't even service our own people.
And humiliatingly doing so as well, given that the Royal Navy used to rule the waves, and now we're sort of acting as a chauffeur service on the Channel. It's very odd that we can't control that small out of land when we controlled all of the oceans.
On Twitter, there's a boat where a sailor is leaning across, looking at a boatload of migrants and say, would you like to become a Tory candidate? Right? And that is... So now it's become a fun.
You mentioned the Tories, Kelvin, because one thing that we haven't mentioned at all in this discussion, and Richard Tice didn't mention it either, is Rwanda. Shall we have a listen to what the Prime Minister was saying on his trademark Rwanda policy earlier today?
We're the ones that have got a clear plan, and that's how we'll deliver a secure future. The particular topic of illegal migration is a case in point. We've got a bold plan, the Rwanda scheme, to ensure that if you come here illegally, you will not be able to stay and you'll be returned. That's how you create a deterrent. The penny is dropping across Europe that is the right approach.
The Prime Minister speaking earlier. Stella, you're shaking your head.
I'm not buying it. If he thought that the Rwanda plan was going to work, he was going to wait to call the election until the autumn. He knows it's not going to work. He knows that the summer is going to be a mayhem. He knows it will look bad.
What if one of the big obstacles to all of this is, in fact, the House of Lords? The House of Lords can block anything that the Commons passes that wasn't in a manifesto. Rwanda wasn't in the last manifesto. Perhaps a general election can unstick that constitutional problem.
Not really. In the end, the House of Lords will allow policy to go by. They've had very, very good and serious concerns about the bill, which of course the Labour Party supports. Which they watered down, and they had good reasons, because you know what? The UK is a democratic country. You have very good...
The House of Lords isn't democratic.
But it is part of your democratic institutions. It has a very good role to play.
The House of Lords is the very opposite of democracy.
It is as a legislative chamber. It has a role to play. I agree that it needs
a constitutional role to play, but not a democratic one.
It is part of your institutions.
Stella and Kelvin, you'll be back a little bit later in the programme, but thank you very much to both of you right now. Of course, we've reached out to the Labour Party for comment as well. Surprisingly, nothing yet from them. But coming up, NHS England are advertising for the post of Assistant Director of Equality, Diversion and Inclusion. Can you guess how much the salary is? It will shock you. And don't forget, we've got a live debate on whether it's proper for members of Parliament to campaign in foreign languages. All that to come.
Good evening. From the Met Office, here's your latest GB News weather update. Whilst it is going to turn drier for most of us by the weekend, before then we still have some thundery showers around. Earlier on today we had a weather system pushing its way northeastwards across the country, bringing some heavy, persistent rain for many of us. That's now starting to clear, though lingering across some northeastern parts through this evening and overnight, and behind it, it isn't turning completely dry. Further outbreaks of showery rain, and some of these could still be heavy, possibly the odd rumble of thunder overnight. Many places staying quite cloudy, so temperatures aren't going to drop a huge amount, but there will be some clear skies around, especially towards the south, and here we could see a few pockets of mist and fog developing tomorrow morning. If we take a closer look at what's happening tomorrow morning, though, quite a cloudy start across northeast Scotland and some outbreaks of lingering rain here. Maybe some brightness across northwest Scotland around the central belt, but on the whole largely cloudy. Further outbreaks of showery rain to be had. Similar for Northern Ireland and Northern England, though some bright spells possible. A brighter picture, though, across central southern England. Greater chance of seeing some sunshine, particularly once any mist and fog patches clear away. As we go through the rest of the day, and it is going to be quite a showery picture for most of us. Any rain lingering towards the northeast may continue for a time, but the greater story will be the fact that there'll be some hefty showers, particularly for eastern Scotland, northeast England, some of these turning heavy and thundery. Elsewhere, the showers may be not quite as intense, but some rumbles of thunder are possible. There will be some sunny spells in between the showers, though, and temperatures rising into the mid to high teens or possibly low 20s towards the southeast. Thursday is going to be another showery day for many of us. Perhaps the showers not quite as intense as on Wednesday, but nonetheless some thundery downpours are still possible, though there will again be some bright or sunny spells in between any showers. Like I said at the start, it is turning drier into the weekend, and so particularly by Saturday and Sunday it's looking mostly fine and quite warm. Bye-bye.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you.
That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice.
Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, this is State of the Nation at 8:36. Now, we've all seen over recent years the rise of what's known as EDI in workplaces. For the uninitiated, that's equality, diversity and inclusion. But a new job advert suggests that one organisation at the heart of our country is perhaps more in the grip of EDI requirements than others. This job advertisement within the NHS for an Assistant Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion offers a salary of £91,317. Very specific. While that figure is eye-watering on its own, it's only when we compare it to other roles that the full extent of this EDI curiosity becomes clear. The Treasury, yes, that Treasury, advertised the role of Head of Cyber Security, a role many I'm sure would suggest is more important than diversity. Well, that pays somewhere between £50,000 and £57,000. That means the Treasury's cyber security head would be paid around half the salary of an NHS Assistant Diversity Director. While that sinks in, what other comparisons can we make? It appears that the extraordinary feat of reaching outer space is not deserving of the same wage of an Assistant Director of Diversity at the NHS, with an astronaut being expected to earn between £40,000 and £86,000, depending on experience. Well, with me now is the journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, and my panel remains with me as well, former Labour advisor Stella Santakidou and former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie. Benjamin, it's extraordinary when we compare these jobs to equality, diversity and inclusion jobs. This is a racket. No, I don't think it's extraordinary at all. Only thing that's extraordinary is the fact that the Treasury is paying someone with such a critical role such a pathetic sum of money. I am strongly of the opinion that those kind of jobs in Whitehall should be offering 4 times that salary, because then we might have a more effective civil service that can compete with the private sector. When you look at something like the NHS and NHS trusts, which are massive organisations with budgets of tens of millions of pounds, first of all, they have a legal requirement to ensure that they meet all of the diversity laws, that staff aren't victims of racism and sexism. We know, for example, that women still earn less than men in many roles. The British Medical Association found that...
Only if you compare different jobs.
Well, there are so many examples that you hear all the time of women not getting the promotions, not getting the same salaries. But take the British Medical Association's research that found that 1/3 of ethnic minority doctors and nurses said that they'd considered leaving the profession because of things like racism and prejudice. Now, it would cost a lot more than 91 grand to recruit all of those doctors and nurses.
Benjamin, this isn't the head of diversity. This is an assistant head of diversity. There are many people who have higher roles within the diversity department of NHS trusts and individual hospitals even, who are on more than this. It's a huge amount of money.
It's not.
It's far... Are you saying £91,000 a year is not a huge amount of money?
I don't think it is.
That is well into the top 2% of salaries.
Not quite the top 2%, but it's not an unreasonable amount of money, because first of all, as I say, there's the legal responsibility. I hate this idea that we have in this country. I'm sorry, I can't stand the line of questioning where people look at well-paid senior jobs and go, oh, how dare they earn that money? Good, I want more better paid jobs with that responsibility. But look at what the NHS does.
Why is this such a responsibility? The NHS should be treating people. The NHS should be investing perhaps more in modern technology than in diversity managers.
Well, the fact is, what does the NHS does? It treats people in their healthcare in some of the most critical moments in their lives. There was research only last year that found that black women were still far more likely to have serious complications during pregnancy compared to white women. Now, how do you resolve serious inequalities like that? You have to have a staff and a structure that can overcome it in their representation, in how they see the problems in the NHS, and that takes investment.
Are they doing that, or are they just promoting lots of lovely sort of cork boards with initiatives and ways for people to involve themselves in seminars? Because it does seem that in much of the private sector and the public sector, it's sort of after-work drinks or mid-work quality walks.
Look, I don't know. I won't walk far for much, but look, I think the problem the NHS faces isn't diversity officers trying to improve the service. It's a lot of straight white right-wing blokes that have been running it from the Tory government for the last 14 years.
Well, let's turn to a straight white right-wing bloke. Kelvin Mackenzie, what do you make of that?
Well, I clearly you haven't been in a hospital lately, where if you go into a hospital, the actual people, I suspect, this was set up in order to make sure that people of colour got a crack of the whip in every way. Actually, the NHS is by and large run by majorities. So if you're actually saying what we should have is more people who are white trying to fight for the minority of employees who are white and aren't getting promoted, I could understand your argument. I can't believe that we need any more people to do this kind of jobs. In places like News Corp, right, an organisation I know reasonably well, when that poor guy died in America,
George Floyd, you're talking about?
Yes, they had a 9-minute silence for him, right? A more absurd and ridiculous idea I'd never come across in my life, because their equality and diversity people said, we've got to make a big show of that. How do you feel about 9 minutes for George Floyd?
Well, of course, that's the length of time that he was strangled by a police
I know why it
officer.
was, but how do you feel about that?
Well, I think a lot of the black staff in particular in News Corp probably appreciated the fact that it was taking a stand. And if you look at business...
Why do they need to take a stand about what the police do in the United States
well, what
of
about
America?
the guy... What about the jeweller tonight who has died in Richmond in Surrey when two, how should we put them, hoodlums of colour actually had a chokehold? He went home and he killed himself. So how many minutes should we give to that? There are lots of things going on in our world, as you well know, which are very upsetting.
OK.
And if we're going to stop every time that somebody dies in unfortunate circumstances, we'll never get any work done. And that is why I'm hostile to this.
Well, Stella, a final word to you.
I think sometimes, yes, equality and diversity can be a waste of money when it goes to things that are not necessary for the function of the organisation. But when just last year you had Birmingham Council being pushed into bankruptcy because they were found out to not have given women equal wages,
then because they paid bin men more than they paid cooks.
But then you can see Ben's point that if they had someone who was looking appropriately in equality and diversity and the actual practical policy implications of what they were doing, then maybe you wouldn't have this situation. You wouldn't have this legal liability. That's what Ben is saying. This is a multi-million pounds organisation. Like, it needs to have someone looking seriously and taking responsibility for these decisions.
Well, we asked the NHS about this job role, and a spokesperson said NHS England has saved over £400 million this year by shrinking its workforce, money which is being diverted to the front line. Following a review of equality, diversity and inclusion roles, NHS England has reduced these posts by more than a third, and the remaining positions are there to support the NHS to meet its legal duties, as well as to help recruit and retain staff. So perhaps, even though there are these jobs being advertised, there are fewer than there were just a few years ago. But coming up next, how do you feel about members of Parliament campaigning in different languages? Labour member for Bradford West, Naz Shah, has issued a campaign video in Urdu, prompting strong views on both sides.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Emma, let's start, shall we, with Prince William confirming on the Isles of Scilly yesterday that Kate is doing well. I thought it was a very brave lady to say, "We're allowed to ask how the Princess of Wales is," and I thought, well, we're not, so good for you.
Yeah. In one of the hospitals he visited on the Isles of Scilly, an administrator, a hospital administrator, asked him how Kate was doing, and he said, "She's doing well, thanks."
Until we hear official word from the palace, then we're just going to have to rely on little snippets like this.
It does seem to be serious. So
It does.
Again, we wish her
What's
very
quite telling as well, I went through some of the social media comments on this, and people that live on the Isle of Scilly were just saying how close they got, how wonderful it was. He's supporting local businesses, and that pasty shop will now be like treasured, forever. That people forever go there.
On the Quay. It sounds great. It's called On the Quay.
Compare and contrast with this "I feel at home in Nigeria" vibe that Meghan's putting out. Two very, very different takes on how to be a royal.
Do they want to be royals or do they not? Because they seem to want sort of half the trappings but without all the kind of responsibilities.
These two brothers, who obviously went through a lot growing up, obviously can't stand the sight of each other right now, and it's just really sad.
Well, it goes beyond the brothers. I mean, we are told from some of the papers this morning that the King didn't have time in his schedule to see his son because he was actually meeting David Beckham for a private meeting.
Well, who would you choose?
All about priorities.
I mean, I know
it's all about priorities.
But, you surely, you could just pop in as well. I reckon that Harry and Bex are pals, probably. So what's gone on there, and will they ever be able to repair things?
And they really were so close. I mean, when you compare the Buckingham Palace garden party, a couple of miles down the road, literally Harry was at Westminster or wherever it was. It wasn't far. And it absolutely would have been possible for him to go.
3 miles apart, and yet absolutely worlds apart in terms of their emotional state. If you want your news to be straight talking, this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 47 minutes past 8. Now, a Labour Member of Parliament has caused a stir with regard to how she's campaigning. Yes, this is Naz Shah that we're talking about, which is who's the Member of Parliament for Bradford West. Well, she has been speaking in Urdu in a recent campaign video. Posted on X, Naz Shah, the Member of Parliament for Bradford West, wrote, along with an announcement, a video about a summer general election being set for July the 4th. Well, she was speaking in the South Asian language throughout. Shall we discuss how the public think of talking about campaigning in foreign languages? Back with me is my panel, the former Labour advisor Stella Santakidou and the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie. Well, Stella, you're Greek originally.
Yeah.
And I don't think that many people campaign in Greek. It would seem a little bit unusual too, I suppose.
I mean, there isn't such a big Greek population as there is a Pakistani population. But if you look at other countries like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United States, there you will see that a lot of politicians actually will distribute material in the language that people understand. And this is something that is seen from the local community as a very positive thing. It's seen as this politician wants to reach out to us. So it's not... I understand what it may look like on Twitter, and I'm very interested to hear your opinions on this. But I think there's nothing wrong with it, especially because Naz, you have to remember, she's also the vice president of the all-party parliamentary group for British Muslims. So, and this is not something that she's done. It's not the first time that she's used Urdu to campaign. And this is something that a lot of politicians do at the end of the day.
Kelvin?
Well, the truth about the matter is I know Bradford reasonably well. I used to own a business there. And the reality is that Bradford is like another country. Right? It is a very, very, very large Muslim population and has been growing now for about, I think, about 50, 60 years. What I can't understand is what percentage... Now, this came up in the Nigel Farage discussion the other day when he was on TV. What percentage of the Bradford population can't speak English? And my second question is, why is that? Is it because what is happening is that when the Muslims arrive in Dover, they eventually claim they have, because you can do this, have friends or family, and then you go and live up there. But I'm asking, why is it that they can't, why is it that they still can't speak English? Bradford has been a Muslim hotspot. It's been a Muslim hotspot for literally 6-7 decades. So
Muslim hotspot or Muslim hotspot. Okay, so you're talking about a constituency that has a lot of Muslim people. I think that's a better way to because when you use the word hotspot, it's as if you're saying that Muslim is the same thing as a criminal hotspot or gangster hotspot.
It is a hotspot.
These people didn't come here through Dover.
It is an attraction for other Muslims.
Hang on.
This is not. These people didn't come here on boats. These people came here probably on very legitimate visas.
Well, but they still went to one place, though. They went to Bradford.
Isn't this the significant point of this discussion? In that if people come here on a visa, you would probably expect them to be able to speak the language of the country to which they're travelling to. In fact, in our new points-based system, proficiency in English is one of those requirements. Is there a failure of integration? Is that what this is showing here?
There could be a failure of integration, but whose failure is it? Is it just the failure of that community? Is it also the failure of us as a country that we haven't managed to integrate them?
Come on. It can't be our responsibility. It can't be our responsibility to teach an old
do you think that the outrage has been there? And do you think it's helpful when you're using language such as saying Muslim hotspot?
Yeah, I do. Hotspot is what it is.
And finding it so offensive that a Muslim MP is speaking...
which are Muslim hotspots
Kevin,
as well.
If I become a Greek MP, will you have a problem if I release a video in Greek?
No,
10 years from now.
If you are appealing to a Greek hotspot, I would be puzzled.
Will you have
since
a problem
you told me that in fact there weren't many Greeks in the country.
If Bambos Haralambo, a Greek MP, released a video in Greek because his constituency in North London has a big Greek population, would you have the same problem that you have with
I would call it a Greek hotspot, and I would wonder why it was.
You wouldn't. You know why you wouldn't? Because Greek people are white. So you wouldn't.
On that point, I think it's probably worth at this point saying there was another member of Parliament who once campaigned and spoke to constituents in Urdu, and his name was Enoch Powell, a fluent speaker of the language. But just finally, on the issue of Diane Abbott, it seems that there's been a hokey-cokey this evening with whether she's a Labour MP, suspended, not allowed to stand, but given the whip back. Kelvin, where are we with this?
Well, it's like most things connected with the Labour Party. It's a complete farce. They're trying to hide the truth. Literally, it now emerges, despite the fact that Starmer said, actually, I've no idea what's happening on that inquiry. In fact, 6 months ago, she knew that she wasn't going to be allowed to stand again. But in a hokey-cokey, they've allowed her to keep her role, probably so that she can get a decent payoff.
Stella, this is a joke, isn't it? She's an MP now for 3 days and then not allowed to stand.
Yeah, Diane Abbott didn't know. I don't think that she had knowledge of this. I do think that it has been handled badly. I do not like the fact that it is okay that we weren't made aware of it, but I do think that there should be more respect and dignity afforded to Diane Abbott. She has been an MP for 37 years.
Does it make Starmer look a bit shifty?
No, it doesn't. It makes him look ruthless. It makes him look like he's absolutely certain that he wants to rule, he wants to win. That's what it makes him look like.
Well, Stella, Kelvin, thank you very much for joining us and talking with those spirited discussions. Up next is Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what's on your show?
Yeah, massive show tonight. Labour frontbencher James Murray. Diane Abbott's back. Labour's flagship education policy is crumbling, and so is their endorsement from business leaders. The BBC mask slipped when it came to Nigel Farage. Do youngsters need to stop whinging about supporting the pensioners? All of that and much, much more.
Looking forward to it, Patrick, full of energy as ever. Well, of course, that's coming up immediately after your very latest weather forecast, but I'm told to say it's definitely sunny in Somerset.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. From the Met Office, here's your latest GB News weather update. Whilst it is going to turn drier for most of us by the weekend, before then we still have some thundery showers around. Earlier on today we had a weather system pushing its way northeastwards across the country, bringing some heavy, persistent rain for many of us. That's now starting to clear, though lingering across some northeastern parts through this evening and overnight, and behind it, it isn't turning completely dry. Further outbreaks of showery rain, and some of these could still be heavy, possibly the odd rumble of thunder overnight. Many places staying quite cloudy, so temperatures aren't going to drop a huge amount, but there will be some clear skies around, especially towards the south, and here we could see a few pockets of mist and fog developing tomorrow morning. If we take a closer look at what's happening tomorrow morning, though, quite a cloudy start across northeast Scotland and some outbreaks of lingering rain here. Maybe some brightness across northwest Scotland around the central belt, but on the whole largely cloudy. Further outbreaks of showery rain to be had. Similar for Northern Ireland and Northern England, though some bright spells possible. A brighter picture, though, across central southern England. Greater chance of seeing some sunshine, particularly once any mist and fog patches clear away. As we go through the rest of the day, and it is going to be quite a showery picture for most of us. Any rain lingering towards the northeast may continue for a time, but the greater story will be the fact that there'll be some hefty showers, particularly for eastern Scotland, northeast England, some of these turning heavy and thundery. Elsewhere, the showers may be not quite as intense, but some rumbles of thunder are possible. There will be some sunny spells in between the showers, though, and temperatures rising into the mid to high teens or possibly low 20s towards the southeast. Thursday is going to be another showery day for many of us. Perhaps the showers not quite as intense as on Wednesday, but nonetheless some thundery downpours are still possible, though there will again be some bright or sunny spells in between any showers. Like I said at the start, it is turning drier into the weekend, and so particularly by Saturday and Sunday it's looking mostly fine and quite warm. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you can win a whopping £20,000 cash. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, as lines close on Friday. You've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your